And welcome everybody to today's webinar, Accelerating Business Application Development Using the Cloud. Today's webinar will be recorded, so if at the end you want to share with any of your team or you have to drop off and you need to pick it up at a later point in time, we will make that available and email that out to you shortly. So I'm going to start a little bit slowly here. My peers at CloudShare were joking that I tend to start webinars too quickly and or end them too quickly. So we'll slow it down a little bit. And let's talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss today, because there's a lot of perceptions of what business application development could be. So really we're going to explore the technical and the business aspects of bringing your line of business application development to the cloud and why you would do that, and some of the considerations, challenges that an organization can face with those decisions. A few housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat dialog box and we will get to any technical questions immediately. Any questions related to the content, we'll save those for the end because you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. All right, so before I kick it off, I'd like to put two polls out there so I can get a sense of who the audience is today. So the first poll is, what types of business applications are you currently working on? And I understand that most often it's not one or the other type of business application, but what sort of line of business applications are you currently building for your organizations? We'll let the responses come in here over a few seconds. And obviously there's a lot of different types of business applications out there. This is really interesting. Great. Wow. Okay. Well, to my surprise, I expected to see slightly different results. So it looks like the vast majority of you are not. I thought I very carefully selected the top three, but are actually working on something more unique. I'd be curious to hear in the chat dialogue what those types of business applications are. And then an even mix across the others. So that's really fascinating. If you don't mind typing in the chat dialogue what your others are, that would be interesting to take a look at. And then I'm going to do one more poll here. I'd like to know, what stack are you developing on? So again, I think I picked a lot of the common stacks out there, but what stack are you currently developing your business application on? Fantastic. Okay, well at least I guessed this one correctly. Looks like most of you have voted. So let's take a look at the results there. And the vast majority of you are working on the Microsoft stack, some with SAP, which we know is a big giant, and then we have some others. So that's great. I'd love to hear the feedback from the others, either directly via email or in the question and answer if you have time, so we can learn more about that. So that helps me understand what we're talking about today, and it allows me to go ahead and jump in. Let's take a look at what our agenda is. First, we're going to do some brief intros. If you haven't heard a webinar from me before, give you a sense of who I am, who CloudShare is. Then let's set the playing field of why are we here, why this topic, why now. Make sure we clear up some definitions so I don't throw out anything that is not familiar to you. State the problem of application development, business application development, and really explore where the cloud can fit. And I hope by the end of this webinar that you leave with some ideas about the possibilities of using cloud for web application or business application development, and also things that you need to consider. Because as I'm going to illustrate in this webinar, cloud is not synonymous with application development. You really have to make some special considerations for line of business application. We're going to start with several slides. I have about 16 slides here, and then I'm going to do a demonstration of some live examples using CloudShare as an example of how some of this can work. My name is Chris Riley. If you are tweeting during this webinar, feel free to tweet at me at hoardinginfo, and hopefully I can respond to those messages after the webinar. I am Technology Evangelist for CloudShare, and what that really means is that I'm representing you. So I'm representing the user and the voice of the user internally to the company, and helping you out better leverage our technology for what you're doing. I'm a developer, also an author in the areas of business application development, and a regular speaker. CloudShare, which many of you are probably familiar with, is a cloud built specifically for development. So that's the marketing phrase. What does that really mean? Well, I'm going to show you today what that means is that there's specific functionality for business application development that makes it faster for you and your organization to be opportunistic and build out business applications. And we're really focused on agility. Last time I showed the Lego figures on the last webinar, I had 7 or 8 people come to me and ask how to get the Lego figures. We have several options to get the Lego figures, so I'm going to leave my contact information at the end of this webinar, and if you're interested in a little CloudShare person, let me know, and I'll let you know what it takes to receive one. Why are we here today? So first of all, the question from the title of the webinar is why business application? Why do we delineate a difference between business applications and other types of applications? A lot of them solve the same types of problems and so forth, but why does it have its own category? Now the reason and why we spend so much time here at CloudShare understanding the different types of application development is because we've identified that business application development has some requirements that are distinctly different from what we refer to as bottom-up application development. And I will detail what those are. Now, because we're all guilty of kind of putting the development world in a single bucket, what that ends up doing is make everybody's using the words development, but they're all talking about different types of things. And so we want to specifically dive into what business application development is and what the challenges are there. So this webinar came about because we started seeing a lot of our user bases struggling with leveraging some of the functionality that we've built specifically around this simply because they didn't know it was possible. We know that there's a lot of the public cloud services that kind of train the market on what cloud is, but it leaves a hole when it comes to the ups and downs and the volatility that happens in development processes, and organizations are simply missing out. Either their IT department tells them how it's going to be, or they are too in the weeds in a project and they just don't know what's possible. So we felt there was a strong need to educate the audience in the market on how to use cloud to better your processes. So cloud is ubiquitous, but development in the cloud is not. And when most people think about the cloud, they think about production, and they think about production servers, and or they think about moving their IT infrastructure and their end user workloads over to the cloud. What they seldom consider is development processes, and moving development processes to the cloud. The world of bottom-up development is certainly gravitating there, but for even to a lesser extent, our business applications and the development processes for those applications being moved to the cloud. And there's really no reason for that, because the benefits in the cloud are phenomenal for application development in addition, and maybe even more so than production environments. And we also see that the development process is not becoming easier. It's actually becoming more complicated. As your organization brings on new business applications, new siloed applications, now you're merging large applications like Oracle and SharePoint and these types of applications with productivity web applications like Box and Dropbox and Evernote and other tools that you need to bring into the picture and all have work together. It doesn't make your development process easier. If anything, it makes it much more complex and gives you a lot more to think about. But those large business applications we're talking about, like SharePoint and Oracle, they're still here, and your company uses them, and they're committed to them, and they're not going away. And so you, as a part of the strategy team or the development team, needs to find a way to bring everything together and make your users happy. So bottom line, it's not getting easier, it's getting harder, and organizations need to be a lot more deliberate about how they do this type of application development. So the way we're defining line of business applications are purpose-built applications that your organization's licenses, and they usually serve a specific purpose in your organization, like customer relationship manager we saw on the survey results, although I must not have chose the right three combo there, but enterprise content management, relationship management, it could be portals, intranet, extranet. There's a lot of different applications that are relatively purpose-built to solve a problem internally. However, your job is to usually tie that in with another application that's solving another problem and either help the organization surface data better or interact with the data better. And the diagram below shows kind of a very simplified view of what a line of business application, the type of applications you're developing are. You have custom solutions that integrate with systems, and there's an input-output layer that you're surfacing to your external or internal users. All of these applications, what makes them interesting is what you're doing is very integration heavy and configuration heavy versus the bottom-up world, which I will define here shortly. So let's look at some more characteristics of line of business application development. There's many systems and many code bases, and many of those code bases are not owned by you. They're owned by your ISV. But you have to interact with them via an API or some sort of framework. Not only that, each of these systems has its own infrastructure and technical requirements. Each has its own code base and lifecycle, and each of your custom integrations has its own code base and lifecycle. And usually, because we're talking about enterprises and organizations, usually it's very, well, I'll say, process-driven or related to some business activity. So what I've seen as of late that's really interesting is these custom integrations are released in a waterfall type manner, but the development team itself is agile in terms of how they work with a roadmap and so forth. The applications they're building are not very opportunistic. They usually solve an immediate problem that the organization has. So they align with some business objective, and it's managed by a project manager or a business analyst, and the application is built to solve a specific problem versus looking out and saying, what are the world of problems or opportunities we could solve? And a lot of times what we see is that the code base that you're creating often is slipstreamed into existing environments or systems. So let me give you an example of that. You have an existing HR portal, and all of a sudden you want to have a requirement for job requests to come through your website and automatically feed into that portal. This feature that the development team is responsible for creating is usually fit into an existing ecosystem, whereas bottom-up applications tend to be able to create that ecosystem. So it makes the reliance on these various systems very, very big. So let's contrast this with the other world of application development that CloudShare has identified. If we, for better or worse, we refer to this to bottom-up application development. Really what we're talking about with this is applications that are in the full control of the development team, not aligning, not connecting with a SharePoint or not connecting with an SAP. These are applications built from the bottom up. You own the predominant portion of the code besides the various frameworks that you're using. All the processes are in the control of the development shop versus some project management team or some business unit. Dev processes, and this is a very important differentiator. In the bottom-up application, development processes are prescriptive and they're deliberate. So a lot of the ISVs out there or a lot of the large organizations that are building a web application for their customers, for example, or a mobile application for their customers are very deliberate about how they write their code, how they release their code. Whereas what you find in organizations that are doing line of business application development is that they are at the mercy of whatever business unit requests them to do, both in terms of release cycles and how they develop, and so the development process is not deliberate. With bottom-up applications, you get into regular release cycles, where they're at a regular cadence, so every 2 weeks, once a month, and so forth. Whereas we see a lot of line of business application development has a flurry of releases and then a big window before the next major release. Bottom-up application development are able to fully embrace DevOps and ALM. It's not that business application development doesn't want to. They do, and we see this a lot with our clients on the Microsoft stack using TFS and SharePoint. For example, they all want to use TFS to do automated deployments with SharePoint. The problem is SharePoint, and it becomes very challenging to do that in an on-premise infrastructure and so forth. So it's not that these dev shops don't want to move that way, it's that they're hitting a wall when they try. And in the bottom-up application development, simply the dev team has full control over the code base. Whereas in the line of business application development world, you are heavily reliant on your ISV to provide you patches, updates, and so forth to your code base. And here's a simple graph that shows kind of what happens in an enterprise with the line of business application development versus if you fully embraced DevOps. So what I want you to take away from that is that it's reactive instead of proactive line of business application development, which means it doesn't allow you to take advantage of opportunities. How many times have you all been sitting there and saying, wow, it'd be really great if we could implement this new feature in our line of business application? For example, it would be really great if we could leverage the latest in SQL reporting services, or it would be really great if we could use Performance Point or Power Pivot inside of SharePoint and roll that out across an organization. You see the opportunities, you know what they are, but how often are you actually able to leverage those opportunities? Most of the time you're not. And it's for all the reasons we said previously that you're not. But there's one additional reason. Because all line of business applications live in their own infrastructure in their own silos, there is a huge risk of going in, making a change, and breaking something. And that sheer risk prevents a lot of organizations from advancing. So when I get on the phone with an analyst and we kind of joke around, ha ha ha, enterprises are way behind, it's not that development teams inside of enterprises are behind. They want to be cutting edge, but there's some things that prevent them from doing that, and it's namely those line of business applications you're trying to integrate with. I already said it's reactive, not proactive, and really the development process is not as deliberate as it should be. So the obvious answer is to go to the cloud, because the cloud solves everybody's problems, right? Yes and no. I mean, we know what all of the clear benefits of the cloud are. We know that infrastructure, you're going to get it faster and cheaper. You're not going to have to wait for your IT department for a week to get a stinking VM that you need to release your custom code on, or get a license that you need to do some development with. We know that. We also know that by using the cloud, we move some of the volatile pieces, and this is a huge benefit for line of business application development. You move the volatile pieces out of your on-prem or production cloud. You move those pieces away, and that allows you to break things and not care. That's great. We know that. We know we can do that. And we also know that as projects come in the organization, projects in the line of business world tend to have some sort of seasonality. End of the year budgets, all that good stuff you're all very familiar with. But these projects come and go. And so you may have 20 projects at one time and 2 at another time. So the cloud allows you to grow and shrink with all that. We all know the benefits of cloud. And we all know that probably our organization has some initiatives around cloud. What happens, though, is you start turning to the general purpose cloud services and the obvious 2 players out there, and you start building infrastructure and you kind of get committed, and sometimes it gets piggybacked with other cloud services that you're using and maybe your production environment. But I'm suggesting that the general purpose cloud is not going to work for you. It is not going to work for your line of business application development. You actually need to seek out a cloud service that does a little bit more. So instead of just mixing cloud with everything else, and we're kind of at this point in the evolution of infrastructure as a service in PaaS, that you don't have to go out and just pick one cloud for your entire organization. You can pick the cloud that's right for your problem and your challenges. And most of the public clouds out there, the vast majority, are not built for line of business application development. In order to meet the needs of you, the line of business application developers, and the development teams, and the analysts, and the project managers, you need a few more things that you're not going to get from the public cloud. You need to have the ability to replicate code and configuration. Replicate code is kind of obvious. We all know we can use the source repository and pull down branches of code and deploy it and run it. But configuration is not obvious. What about that SAP HANA deployment that requires multiple servers, or that SharePoint farm configuration, especially now with SharePoint 2013, where you have to have the web applications server as a separate server? All of that configuration is complex too. And you need all of that when you integrate. You don't need just one piece of it. You need the whole configuration. If you were to go to one of the 2 major cloud service providers and try to replicate, what you have to do is snapshot a disk and then copy the snapshot of the disk in a shutdown state, and then copy it however many times you need to copy it over, and then rebuild the networking and rebuild the configuration and do all of that, which is a lot of work and a lot of effort spent. The next thing is you need the ability to start fast and revert fast. Now, you may not know that you need this ability because I see a lot of organizations kind of overlooking the potentials here. But if I go back to where I was saying that you know how to advance the organization in terms of technology, but you don't get an opportunity to do that. The big reason you don't is because it's very hard to take these big configurations and work in them, test something new without concern of disrupting the rest of the organization. Well, if you have a cloud service that allows you to spin up copies of environments quickly, configuration and all, and revert them should something go wrong, which it will eventually, quickly, then you can be more opportunistic. Then you can start looking at new functionality, new service packs, new code bases that you previously avoided. Obviously, with organizations and the way you work on the code, with the bottom-up application, they can collaborate by working on different branches of code and committing it to a source repository. When you're building a line of business application, however, you need to work with business units. You need to work with business analysts and project managers and other developers who have other integrations that all have to tie together. So the ability to collaborate is not on the source repository level. The ability to collaborate is on the infrastructure and the entire environment level. So you want to be able to share that work with each other and other users. Don't worry, we're getting to the end of the slides here, and we're going to do some live examples, I promise. But I want to really make clear that the public cloud services are not built for line of business application development. And what you can do is go and find a cloud service that has replication and snapshotting of live environments, configuration, and all, and integration with your common tools like your IDE, your bug tracking, your source repository. Maybe you're using some continuous deployment and integration tools. Also have the ability to share both copies of complete configurations, could be SharePoint plus your custom-built web application plus a database, could be SAP plus HANA plus, who knows, SharePoint. And all those configurations, you need to be able to copy those n number of times without any additional effort, share them, and invite both your external users and your team members that are part of the project. And finally, I'm going to introduce this concept of programmable infrastructure. I don't know how many of you out there are familiar with programmable infrastructure. Just a nice fancy term for the ability to bring and script your infrastructure as a part of your code, whether it's command line based or a robust API or so forth, that helps you tie things together even more neatly. And I'm going to talk about a trend that's going on after I do the demos that bring programmable infrastructure into the development picture in a very interesting way. So let's take a look at a few live examples of some of what I'm talking about here. And obviously we are CloudShare, so what we're going to do is demo our CloudShare environment. I'm going to start off just by logging into the web interface of CloudShare. And you see here, this is our Team Labs product. We have 3 product tiers. We have our professional product, which is for the individual developer. And then we have our Team Labs product, which is for the line of business application developer, you all. And then we have our enterprise product, which focuses on training and ISVs for sales demos. So I've logged into my Team Labs account, and I have a simple dev environment here. This dev environment has a SQL server and a Windows server, and all the standard. I can log in, I can RDP into the machine, I can transfer files, I can edit the hardware. I have full control over this environment. I can go in and install my own stuff if I want to. So with the web interface, we allow users to create environments from scratch directly in the browser, like you might do if you're starting a brand new project. Let's say you're starting a brand new ERP project and you want to create it from scratch. But we also allow you to create from existing snapshots. Now this is really cool. Say for example we're talking SAP HANA, where in SAP it's a big data platform. Maybe you want to start out with a snapshot that is just the installation. Then you want to take a version of that snapshot which is the installation plus some sample data. You could do the same with SharePoint. Maybe you have an installation of SharePoint that is a small farm configuration without profile services and managed metadata enabled. Then you take a snapshot of it as a different version with it suddenly enabled. So you can actually run from a library of your own configuration. I'm not just talking about disks like you would get inside of an AWS or Azure. I'm talking about snapshots of environments in their current running state and all the machines. So if I go to my project templates and I select my project here and I look at all the various templates that I have available. For example, I have this SharePoint one that has 2 machines, and I have this other one that has 3 machines, like a small farm SharePoint 2013 configuration. I can take this whole thing without building it, and I can replicate it over and over again. So we allow you to build an environment from scratch or take one from a library. Now you could do that inside of the user interface here, which is nice, or you can do it from inside your favorite tool. We know in the survey said most of you were working on the Microsoft stack, so I'm sure you're familiar with Visual Studio. And so I've launched my Visual Studio, and you see here on the top right CloudShare Explorer. And this CloudShare Explorer is going to list all the VMs from my project, my environment that I have access to. So I don't even need to go to the browser. I can access my infrastructure and modify my infrastructure directly from inside Visual Studio. So the same place I'm deploying my code, I can launch these servers. So I can reboot machines, I can revert to previous versions, I can do full screen RDP, or I can even do web access, which if you're building a web application is fantastic for sharing with prospects and clients or your internal users without giving them access to the VM directly. And you see here that this is the same environment we saw in the browser. Or we could take it one step further and actually integrate this into our IT operations or our scripts that we have set up that are a part of deployments and so forth. And I'm going to show you a flavor of using our actual API to do the same, build out environments and access your environments. So I open up a simple command line prompt, and because I have the CloudShare command line plugin installed, I can actually go in and list all my environments, which we know is just one at this point. And you get either a JSON view, or if I do this, I can get a more formatted view of the environments, which we currently only have one running, which is our standard dev environment. So that's cool, and that's good for getting information. But I can also create environments. And instead of writing out this command from scratch, I'm going to go ahead and paste it in here. So what I'm saying is create a brand new environment from a snapshot. Yeah, these numbers mean snapshot. A particular snapshot from my library. Let's give it a name that is more attractive than from CLI for you. And now I can create an environment directly from here. And you can imagine what this opens up for your organization. You can create bat files, or you can create PowerShell scripts that are run on a daily, weekly basis, whatever you want. You can schedule your infrastructure creation at the beginning of a work week for example. All things that you could not do previously, and you probably are not able to do with your production infrastructure. So it says it's creating an environment. If I go back to Visual Studio and refresh the environment list here, it should show up. Yep. For you environment, it says it's currently provisioning it. That's fantastic. If I go back here and list the environment list, I should see this as a new environment that I can now access and work with. So the beauty of what I was talking about before in this programmable infrastructure is that, you know, in a way, infrastructure becomes a part of your application, and you don't even have to think about it. Whereas standing up a server usually makes you shudder a little bit, and you know you have to submit a request to IT and all this stuff. But now, creating an environment is the same as creating a class in your code or creating a method in your code. It's very, very fast. If we switch back to the browser here, we will see that this new environment has been created. Now, that's great. We've created it. We can work with it. We can access it, RDP. But what about the snapshotting? What I said before is what separates the clouds built specifically for development and testing versus the clouds that are just general purpose is that if you want to go and snapshot an environment in the general purpose clouds, literally what you have to do is snapshot a disk. Well, first, you have to shut down your environment, all your machines in your environment. You have to snapshot each individual disk. You have to copy the disk a number of times over, however many times. You have to recreate the network. You have to recreate the VM and attach the disk. You have to boot it up and make sure that all the configuration is going to work. It's going to take you at least a day to replicate once. Now with CloudShare, or a cloud built specifically for dev test, it's as simple as a button click to replicate. Because the way snapshot should be done is it should be the environment configuration, the networking, including the VLAN, everything all together in a single unit, and that unit be repurposed in its running state. So if I were to snapshot this environment right now, I could snapshot as a version of an existing environment. What I'm actually doing is I'm taking everything in its current running state and saving it off, right? And now I can take that and I can replicate it. If we have 5 separate developers working on the same project, I can give each developer one copy of this same exact environment. And if you just think about the amount of time that saves you and or your IT department, it's pretty tremendous. So let's go back to the slides, and obviously everything I've shown today is available to you, the audience of this webinar. If you want a trial of anything that I've shown, just let us know after and we will set that up for you. So let's go back to the slides and start to get ready your questions, because after I complete this slide here, we're going to go right into questions. But I want to leave you with some opportunities looking into the future. What does the future hold for line of business application development? And these are trends that we've seen with our own customers and trends that we know are picking up. At a high level, what we see is that dev shops inside of organizations are sick of being reactive and they want to be more proactive. And by being proactive, they have already started to become more deliberate about their development processes. So they start to embrace some of the approaches of DevOps and ALM and bringing that into their world. With that, we see a lot of hybrid cloud scenarios. So we see a lot of organizations that cannot move all of their production environments to the cloud, but what they can move is their development workloads to the cloud. And what they do is they create a VPN tunnel, either using a software-defined network or using VPN tunneling technology to connect CloudShare to their on-premise network. What this allows them to do is it allows them to create dev environments inside of their cloud, their dev test cloud, and using Active Directory federation or accessing their SQL Server that's on-prem in their cloud environment gives them a lot more flexibility, and it also overcomes a lot of the hurdles, security hurdles and red tape that you know you have to face inside of your organization. So that's percolating up and becoming more and more common. And then the next thing that we see that is a really big trend that I already mentioned is that the programmable infrastructure. And so one of the fascinating approaches is now to include infrastructure as a part of your deployment scripts or as a part of your actual code. So you write your infrastructure, your configuration as a part of your code, and as you do a deployment, it's laid out in front of you, code is copied, all the deployment scripts run, and it's all in a nice solitary unit. One of the things we recently launched inside of CloudShare is a Docker VM template, and Docker is a solution that allows you to do this for bottom-up application development. But we also see it happening with business application development. In the world of business application development, what it requires is not only on the software layer laying out all your infrastructure in your code, it also requires the ability to upload your VMs programmatically, or the ability to get your VMs that might be copies of VMs on-prem into the cloud so you can work against them as a separate unit. Great. So bottom line is there's a lot of opportunities, potential, and new approaches that are coming to the line of business application development world that are allowing organizations to be more opportunistic, be more deliberate about their development processes, and ultimately provide more to their internal users and organization. So hopefully I see that a few questions have popped up. That is good, but I can't see them. Let's see how many. Okay. Great. Okay. This was a statement, thank you, from the other types of applications. We got a lot of people saying the different types of application development that they're doing. All right. I have a question here about TFS in deployment. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we talked about how it's more complex for line of business applications to be just deployed because you're using configurations and all and so forth. One thing that CloudShare provides in addition, and your dev test cloud should also provide, is an integration with your deployment tool or your source repository that creates the infrastructure as you do a deployment. And we do this. We have an integration with TFS, for example. The challenge is, how do you also deploy your line of business application with that? So what the users are doing is they do a one-time setup where they go, let's say it's SharePoint. Okay, they'll go in, they'll do a one-time setup of a base SharePoint environment. And I mean, this is your environment with only the configuration for the bare minimum application deployment. Kind of like if you just set up your farm from scratch, you set up your Active Directory and you set up maybe some of your web applications, maybe not. Then what they do is they use the TFS automatic deployment to actually go, and it will copy SharePoint solution packages. It maybe even will move over a database and so forth, and it will copy PowerShell scripts that will create web applications and so forth, because the big trend in the SharePoint world is scripting your deployments. It'll copy all of that in one fell swoop with the deployment, so that essentially what you're doing is you're taking your code base and the business application and you're doing a full deployment all at once. And it's really, really powerful. So it's possible. The root of this question is, basically, can you do automatic deployment? It is absolutely possible. We see the same with SAP HANA, maybe in a smaller sense, because the installation is not as flexible as SharePoint, but it's absolutely possible to bring your line of business application with you. Okay. Any other questions? We have more questions or statements about the type of application that organizations are building. Okay. There's a question here about GitHub. Yes, in addition to TFS, you can use GitHub to do automatic deployments of your source code for sure. Again, what you need to do is go in and create a snapshot of your business application without your source code so that when GitHub does the deployment, the application is there ready to go and you can lay out your code and have configuration and all. There's a question here specifically on the CloudShare platform about number of snapshots. Basically, we allow our users to create as many snapshots as they need, which is super powerful because what you can do is you can go in and snapshot at every phase of the project, which allows you to roll back if something goes wrong at any point in time, and go to a previous phase. So we don't limit, and we do some really amazing things so that snapshots, you have control over it and you don't get into a situation where you have snapshot sprawl. We also allow you to create policies on who can create snapshots, how long an environment runs for during a day. One of the big problems we see organizations run into is that their developers will leave a huge instance of SharePoint running in Azure for an entire weekend because they got up and left their desk and then they get a huge bill. In CloudShare, what we allow you to do is to actually force suspend environments so it's not ticking against your resources or your costs if there's inactivity. So administrators can define what that looks like for their organization. All right. So there's some more specific questions out there on the platform in general, and what I'd like to do is solicit for you to email me directly with those questions. Also, any feedback. If you want a trial, there's a link to the trial right there. This webinar started with a white paper, so you can download the white paper if you choose to go over the details or share with others. We have recorded this webinar, and we'll send out an email to everybody with the recording so you can take advantage of sharing with your organization and so forth. And everything I demoed today is available in the trial, including the Visual Studio plugin, the TFS plugin, and the command line interface. So thank you, everybody, for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next time. All right? Have a great day.